that we're ready to get started. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining, everyone. Welcome to the HUBZone Council July 2021 quarterly advocacy update. I am Elizabeth Sullivan, or Lizzie, part of Madison Services Group. We are part of the HUBZone advocacy team, and join with me today is Ann Sullivan as well. By the way, please feel free to type anything into the chat that you want to say. Raise your hand, use that function, and then just unmute yourself. We want this to be a conversation. It's much more interesting that way instead of Anna and I talking at you. So we would love that. So we want to kind of start off with what's going on in Washington. It's a tall order to ask that question, but we thought we'd kind of start off the presentation by going over kind of some of the top things that are being discussed in Congress and the administration. And then we're going to move to having HUBZone Council member Michael Dunbar. He's going to talk about his recent testimony in the House, kind of go through what else is going on around the appropriations process, and a couple of policy updates. So let's get started. The biggest item of what's being talked about, if you look at any newspaper or any news source, is the bipartisan infrastructure bill. So we haven't had an update in a few months, so we kind of just wanted to recap, how did we get here? Where are we now? And as you can see on the right hand of the screen, we kind of made a little equation out of it. The president proposed $2.25 trillion in something called the American Jobs Plan, and $1.8 trillion in spending on infrastructure and something called the American Families Plan. These are just kind of the president's ambitious frameworks for what he wanted to see in both traditional infrastructure, which is thinking of building roads and bridges, and what everyone is coining social infrastructure, meaning investment in schools and other things that can begin childcare, other things that are social infrastructure. So the president kind of put those out there into the universe, which then got Congress started on trying to figure out what they want to do, what parts they agreed with, both Democrats and Republicans, because just because the president put something out, even though the Senate and House are Democrat, that doesn't mean that everyone's just going to agree with what he's hoping for in the administration's priorities. So we had that kind of framework to start off towards the beginning of the year. Then Senate Republicans came in, which is why there was a minus, and counter offered, I think, around initially 900 billion or 750 billion, went up to 900 billion, came up with an agreement of what they wanted to see. And that's kind of how we reached, after you take the president's plan, the Senate counteroffer, a bunch of back and forth, we've reached this 579 billion bipartisan Senate infrastructure bill agreement. This agreement was created by, they're calling themselves the Gang of 20, or G20, which was a group of bipartisan senators plus the administration, so plus the president, that negotiated this package. And I'm keep talking, so I'm gonna let you chime in.
Well, I would just say that this is the most movement that an infrastructure bill has gotten in a very long time. And so hence the excitement. The big question is always, how are you going to pay for it? So agreement on the top line numbers and kind of agreement around what might be included is an amazing first step, but there are, as our slide tells you, some challenges. The biggest one being, how are you going to pay for it? And then what else to include? Right now, it includes more for traditional infrastructure, meaning roads, bridges, and then 226 billion for broadband, clean energy, and the power infrastructure. And as the nation heats up, I think the power infrastructure is just a critical component that hasn't gotten as much attention as it probably should.
Absolutely. And the negotiations, as Ann said, has been, how are you going to pay for it? So initially in the president's framework, there were some corporate tax increases amongst other things. The Senate Republican deal didn't really have those components. So what this bipartisan group came up with was 4 ways to pay for the infrastructure bill, One was to reduce the IRS tax gap, meaning basically accounting for increased enforcement and oversight by the IRS, saying, there are supposedly billions and billions of dollars not collected each year in taxes, and we're going to up that enforcement, and that will help fund this. Another component to pay for it was to redirect unspent COVID-19 funds. I believe that there are billions unspent there. So then the idea was to move those to pay for this bill. Another way to help pay for it that they agreed to is to allow states to sell or purchase unused toll credits. Basically, toll credits reward states that use their toll revenue on projects that would otherwise be funded by federal money. And then finally, something called unemployment insurance program integrity, basically increasing enforcement on unemployment insurance and those collecting unemployment to weed out fraud and abuse. So this is kind of a couple ways that the G20 said that it would make up for new spending in the infrastructure bill to pay for it.
Also, the question is then how do you move it, right? So if you use the budget reconciliation process, and the Congress is allowed two per session, I think it is, or 2 per year. I think it's 2 per session.
It's per session. It's one per fiscal year. Yeah.
2 per session. And so they've used one. So now there's one left to use. And if you use if you have any kind of revenue measures, you have to use that process. It can't be in an authorization bill. So it remains to be seen how it's going to move forward. If the budget reconciliation bill is used, you only need a majority, which is 51 votes. If it's not used, then you need 60. So depending on how much support this bipartisan deal gets in the Senate, depends on how they're going to move it. The House is a bigger problem in many respects than actually the Senate is. There's not agreement within the Democratic Party in the House in terms of what should be in it. And then, of course, the Republicans are all united against it pretty much. So the House ends up being a bigger obstacle than probably the Senate at this point.
Absolutely. And to answer Steve's question, yes, G20 is what the group of bipartisan senators are calling themselves, not to be confused with international policy that uses terms like G7, but they've coined themselves G20. And as Anne pointed out, that budget reconciliation process, that's what's been used to move legislation in the past that doesn't necessarily have bipartisan support, but the party in power really wants to move. So on the Democratic side, the Affordable Care Act is one, or Obamacare. And on the Republican side, in 2017, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So all of the tax cuts, they moved that by budget reconciliation. So again, stay tuned on this. This is not some, breakneck speed process. Although I think everyone's pretty surprised that there was a bipartisan deal at this point. But again, even though the top line numbers are there, then the Senate, the House, the legislators have to actually create the bill. And that's something we'll be working on with respect to small business. Go ahead.
I just was going to say that every committee in the Senate is responsible for putting together their title in the infrastructure bill. So the Small Business Committee has been busy putting their title together, and we've been working with that team to come up with good ideas. They have some new ideas about how to bring more contract awards to small disadvantaged businesses, which includes not only minority, but also women-owned businesses. And so that's very much in progress. And just know that your input has been part of the discussion in that title.
Absolutely. Eliza, do you want to go to the next slide? We just wanted to, outline there are a few other things going on in Washington, not just the infrastructure bill. But the first one here is the House Transportation Bill, which we kind of alluded to. So the House just passed today a transportation package. It's a package because it's made up of three different bills. And these are, again, geared towards more traditional infrastructure, surface transportation reauthorization, a wastewater drinking bill, and a drinking water infrastructure bill. This is not the House's version of an infrastructure package. It just so happens to be moving at a similar time. This is because that, these three bills, there's one that has to be reauthorized every 5 years. And so they have been working in tandem with this and kind of moving some of the infrastructure priorities through these bills because it makes sense, but it's not the same thing. So I know it can be a little confusing. The one thing we wanted to call out within this package is that it reauthorizes and updates the Department of Transportation's Disadvantaged Business Enterprise, or DBE program, that requires that states use at least 10% of funds via small businesses owned and controlled by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals. Again, this is reauthorized every 5 years. So this is just continuing to say, yes, DOT, this DBE program should still be in place and you should use it.
We did make a run at trying to get HUBZone to be a part of that, but there just wasn't the support for it, or the maybe even interest. And so ever cognizant of trying to get that into the program, we tried, but we were not successful on this bill.
A few other things happening that has been a point of a lot of conversation is around China competitiveness bills. So both the Senate and the House have been working on separate bills aimed at kind of increasing the infrastructure for the US when it comes to things like manufacturing our own technology, semiconductor chips, microelectronics. After the SolarWinds attack and other, cybersecurity attacks on, I'm trying to think, Michael, you used it in your testimony on the gas on the East Coast.
Colonial Pipeline.
Yes.
Thank you. The Colonial Pipeline. There's been a huge focus and push from the administration through executive orders, but then also through Congress in order to beef up the US's manufacturing and increase the ability to manufacture this type of technology. So the Senate did pass something called the US Innovation and Competition Act. It's lots of billions of dollars for helping US manufacturing and development of semiconductor chips. A point of interest in the Senate bill is that there is $10 billion that was allocated over 5 years to stand up something called regional technology hubs. These are within the Department of Commerce across the country. And the goal really is to have each hub focus on advancing creation of technology in those targeted areas, including access to capital and workforce development. And there's a particular focus on rural areas and also underserved communities. So the idea here was, yes, we can throw all this money to say $250 billion for US technology manufacturing, but there needs to be some type of hubs or ability to assist, smaller businesses, mid-sized companies in getting ready to be able to do this. The House also passed two of their own bills that are a little more targeted than the Senate. The Senate bill was more comprehensive. These two are a little more targeted. The first one, HR 2225, allocates $75 billion over 5 years for the National Science Foundation to create a new directorate and expand initiatives to broaden STEM education and careers. Again, getting at that, well, we need the workforce to fill these positions. And then another one, HR 3593, was $95 billion to the Department of Energy's national labs to update their facilities and pursue, they said, scientific research. While, both chambers have passed their respective bills, now they go to the opposite chamber. So these bills have a way to go before they make it to the president, but something that continues to be kind of a drumbeat up on the Hill. Anne, did you have anything on that to note? Okay. In our third bucket here, you can see, again, this is kind of the administration's actions around supply chain and, again, cybersecurity and also, frankly, China competitiveness. So there was an executive order signed in February. The number is 14017, titled America's Supply Chains. It did a couple of things. First, within 1 year, it said that HHS, Department of Commerce, Department of Energy, and the Department of Defense need to submit reports to the president that detail review of the agency's supply chain. So basically, what are the critical goods and materials and manufacturing capabilities that are necessary to produce war fighters, for example, for DoD? Kind of what are things that could disrupt the supply chain? Are there health factors, environmental factors, climate factors? So basically, take a look at your entire supply chain and show us and tell us the vulnerabilities. Also, the executive order has federal incentives and amendments to federal procurement regulations saying that, these could be altered based on the report recommendations. It was super broad, just saying, there's a role for acquisition change in supply chain when it comes to that. So that's kind of what has been going on at the administrative level there. And before I switch, I'm pausing in case you have any comments.
I know, no, you're doing such a good job. I don't.
We say this every time, but we really miss being in the room together. So we'll be thrilled when that happens again, so we don't have to keep pausing awkwardly for each other. And finally, on the last column, which everyone is very excited to hear about, is our kind of council priorities. We just wanted to tick through a couple of the things that we've been working on. This is in addition to kind of larger things around infrastructure and making sure that small businesses get their fair share, or other random things that the Hill asks for the council's input on. These are just kind of some of the main things that we've been focusing on this Congress, which started in January. For category management, that is something that the council has spearheaded for the last couple of years, talking about it as it was ramping up, of how can we make sure that small businesses are not shut out of the market as these direct contracts go away. We were really close to getting a bill through in the National Defense Authorization Act last year around some exemption for small business contracts. Unfortunately, the Office of Management and Budget gave that a big hard no, and really pushed back on that. So we've been working with specifically the House this year to kind of see, are there ways that we can continue to combat this transition with category management and increase in buying through larger vehicles? What can we do? So they're kind of getting creative, changing the language a little bit so that it maybe only has small business jurisdiction and not other committees, basically noodling around to figure out how to get something through on that.
Well, I can't emphasize enough how entrenched the top procurement officials in the government are on category management. I mean, they just think it's a really good idea. They think it's a good strategy. And, they just are unwilling to agree to any kind of change, because they're really in favor of this strategy. So it's an uphill battle for sure.
Absolutely. But as you know, from Anne and getting the program rewrite of the HUBZone program, she loves a good chip away and keep up the drumbeat. So that's what we're doing there. That actually ties right into increasing sole source thresholds. So again, this is something that we did backflips and almost got over the finish line last Congress, but because of some issues with other bills in the Senate, we couldn't get it through. But we are still talking about increasing sole source thresholds for that would be SCVOSB, HUBZone, women-owned small business, and individually owned 8A companies, not tribes, not Alaska Natives. This has nothing to do with their program. There is a bill that was introduced in the House, HR 3065, I think a little over a month ago, that would increase the sole source thresholds to 8 and 10 million. That is not the same as HR 190, our bill from last session that eliminated option years, so allowed it each year. This would be total. So we're working with the Senate to see what they want to do around increasing the sole source thresholds, whether it's basically at least doubling the thresholds to 8 and 14, or if they'd still be open to eliminating those option years. So we're still working with the Senate on that.
And actually, that's in the, remember how I said that they're working on different titles for the infrastructure bill? So that is, there's a placeholder to address sole source in the small business title in the infrastructure bill. The other thing that we've been pushing, though, is what's really important to make it work is to get rid of the interpretation of the law, which says, you have to be the only company in the world that does, that offers a particular service in order to, or product in order to be awarded a sole source. I don't know if that'll get into the legislative language, but what we're pushing for is that there is a direction from the Congress to define that, in fact, they consider it to be much broader than what's been interpreted by the agencies. And I think that would really help sole source.
Yeah, that's something we've heard many times from HUBZone companies in particular, kind of just saying that the contracting officer is pointing to the fact that there is no, congressional language that gives them any type of different interpretation than, only one in the world, what seems to be kind of common. So that's something else we're pushing for there. Another thing that we're working on that has been a council priority for a while is in order to make the HUBZone price preference apply to task orders. I don't know if John Williams is on the call. He is a council member from Polaro Mazza. They've been extremely helpful and wrote a very comprehensive kind of legal white paper on this issue. But we have both interest in the House and Senate on this issue. I know the House has been actually both the majority and minority have been drafting legislation and kind of competed for who could do it in order to basically say, hey, this actually does apply to task orders.
I've been pleasantly surprised. Even though we've mentioned how many times over the years, it goes back to timing is everything. This year, they seem completely open to it. So I'm really hoping we get that change completed this year.
Absolutely. Another bill that we worked on last year, and the reason I keep mentioning that is every Congress, a new bill has to be introduced. So because we're now the 117th Congress, everything from the 116th Congress, that bill doesn't exist anymore. So things have to be reintroduced, removed. Even if it passed something last Congress, which in this case is last year, got to do it again. So there is a bill that I'm calling it the OHA SBA bill that basically requires the SBA to authorize its Office of Hearings and Appeals to decide all appeals from formal protest determinations in connection with the status of a HUBZone small business, instead of the current system where you go to the HUBZone office, which many companies have said, well, that doesn't make any sense. If they said that that's a problem, then how am I supposed to go to them and protest it? So that bill from last year, HR 8229, passed the House, but it didn't make it any further than there. So again, looking to reintroduce that soon in the House, actually, and get movement there. And on these bills, by the way, the House Small Business Committee is probably going to do a markup. They're hoping to do it in June, and it didn't happen. At some point, probably in July, before the August recess, they're hoping to get some of these bills marked up in the committee so that the full House can vote on them. And anything on that?
No, just
Okay.
did you go through subcontracting and HUBZone program funding?
That's next. The HUBZone Council has supported the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce, one of your strategic partners, in their efforts around subcontracting, kind of spearheading changes in that arena. As you can imagine, because the subcontractor relationship is not, a direct government to prime relationship, it's a little harder, and by little I mean a lot harder, to legislate things that can make a difference when it comes to subcontracting, since the Congress is trying to strike a balance between not overreaching into that relationship, but also fixing a lot of the issues that subcontractors have. So there is some legislation, again, kind of floating around in the works around strengthening CPARs and small business compliance around that and having that affect your CPARs. And another component of that bill would be around reporting dollars on the SBA procurement scorecard. So there's actually some good data around, what amount of dollars are flowing to subcontractors, to small businesses. Right now, the SBA puts in a percentage on the scorecard, but a percentage doesn't tell you anything if you don't know how many dollars it is. So that's another component of the bill, or potential bills, plural, around subcontracting that have been in the works.
That, by the way, is not a new requirement for SBA to gather the data. They apparently have it. They just haven't put it together. So it doesn't seem like it's a heavy lift, but it would be tremendously helpful in terms of trying to figure out how to address the problems that come with subcontracting.
Definitely. And the last bullet is, every year the council advocates for increased appropriations or funding for the HUBZone program office at SBA. We make the case that because there were all these rule changes and kind of accelerated timelines, that the program really does need more funding. So we ask every year for a funding of $5 million instead of the existing $3 million. For FY 2022 in the House has proposed only $3 million for the HUBZone program. There's no change, from the last few years. But we also, put in requests in the Senate as well. So we'll kind of see where that is, but know that that's something that we continue to advocate for. And with that, Anne, anything to add? Okay. And with that, I want to turn it over actually to Michael Dunbar. Michael Dunbar is a wonderful HUBZone member, president of Rishka International. He actually testified on behalf of the HUBZone Council in a House Small Business Committee hearing, what was that, last week, Michael, on the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, or CMMC. The goal of the hearing for the Small Business Committee was to hear, what are the issues for small businesses? They're over 70% of the defense industrial base and, have been largely left out of this process. So I think he just did an absolutely fantastic job representing the council. I've seen him quoted in a few articles, which is very exciting. But we just wanted to have him come on and kind of talk about his experience, things that he recommended. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael.
Hello. Well, thanks again, Lizzie, for actually having me go out and testify on behalf of the HUBZone Council. It was a definitely unique experience, something I'd never done before, and I found it very eye-opening, I guess, to actually see how concerned the House committee really was about, making sure we were taking care of as small businesses. They were very surprised, I think, and shocked at the challenges ahead for us, and were very unaware of how bad they were. In the photo there, they actually have, I used that binder as a prop, and that is the level 3 assessment guide for CMMC. And it's a grand total of 430 pages. 430 pages basically for a little small company. When do we have time to actually look, read, understand that, and become experts on it? I can pretty much say none of us have any time to do that. They were very receptive to all of the witnesses that we had. We covered a lot of ground, a lot of territory on different items. Mostly, how are we going to get treated fairly? What can they do to bring the cost down from their perspective? And how much influence can they have with the DoD to try and get the CMC to respect what we need as small businesses, and not just what academia, consultants, and large businesses are saying needs to happen. We had mentioned that there was 74% of the defense industrial base, which is the number provided to the House in testimony, or the Senate in testimony from Justice Salazar, is small business. So we actually carry a lot of weight with this, and we really need to continue pushing that we don't get left behind. Something, I don't know how familiar each of you are with regards to the actual CMMC costs. I've seen assessment costs, actual quoted assessment costs of an excess of $150,000 from one of the current approved C3PAOs for a 50-person company. That's $3,000 per person in excess. And if you take what the CMMC board had been saying at about $2,500 per day plus expenses, that would be 60 man days. And that is completely unrealistic to go ahead and have, assess 50 people. I mean, over one mandate per person, that's ridiculous. So that's something I think they took to heart. I think we've got to see where it can go further. They're definitely willing to listen to any ideas we may be able to present on ways to find money from the House or Senate to get us to cover the initial costs. So I think there's a lot of little items going on there that we have a lot of influence. So I think if anybody has any ideas, please get those to Lizzie. There's a lot of stuff going on, I think, behind the scenes, a lot of jockeying, a bunch of changes happening within not only with the current or the ex now CISO in charge of CMMC has been replaced. And one of the board members just resigned, which was I'll call it a forced resignation. So there's a lot of issues going on there, and I guess we'll see where it goes from here. So Lizzie.
Thanks so much, Michael. Again, thank you for taking the time. He flew up to DC from Florida with that entire binder, which was great. And yeah, as you said, there's a lot of appetite for action, and that's one of the goals of having a hearing like this is to really call attention to the issues, put it on the record, highlight the problems. I put the testimony or the hearing link to the hearing, and within there you can also read the testimony of all 4 witnesses, including Michael and the council, and you can kind of see what was said, what was discussed, and we'll continue to work on this issue. I have to say, we're really one of the only ones kind of talking about this problem solely from the small business perspective. And so I know that the committee is very eager for solutions. So yes, please feel free to reach out to us. I know Michelle had put something on the forum page on the website. So either use that or reach out to us if you have ideas. And I see Steve sent me a message. Steve, do you want to talk about what you just messaged me?
Sure. I can put it to everyone if you'd like. I found out, I didn't realize NDAA 2021 included language requiring large primes to provide past performance evaluations to subs when requested. I don't know if any of you have tried to go after prime contracts that have past performance questionnaire requirements. You got to go to a customer, get them to fill this questionnaire out about how well you performed on your subcontract. A lot of large primes like Booz Allen Hamilton, like Peraton, have corporate legal policies that say we shall not provide any past performance evaluations to subcontractors. I guess the reason is they're afraid they're going to get sued if they give a less than glorious evaluation. But somebody got to Congress and got them to put it in the NDAA that large primes are now obligated by law to provide past performance questionnaires when requested. That led to the question of like, oh my gosh, they're going to get pounded, because I could go after the same prime 5 times on 5 different proposals with different PPQs. So it begs the question, will CPARs be expanded to include subcontract evaluations? It really makes sense for big government to get involved in doing that. As much as I'm a small government advocate, it does make sense that there would be a centralized location for primes to go in and evaluate a subcontractor on a contract once, so they don't have to do it over and over and over and over again.
Got it. Thank you for sharing that. We did have a hand in that language just a bit. But that's a really good point, and that's great feedback to know. Again, this is the type of stuff, this is why we love these meetings, because we want to hear, what's going on, what's working, what's not. And I see Steve just kind of put that in the chat to everyone. So Steve, we're going to look into that and kind of see what's going on, and we'll discuss with you and everyone further. Thank you for sharing that. And I think we want to then talk, and if other people have other issues too, that feel free to chime in. We're also going to have some, I know we'll have a little bit of time at the end to throw in if you have any other issues or comments or questions. But the next thing we wanted to talk about was the FY 2022 appropriations process. I'm going to start with what Anne always reminds me to say, which is, why should you care? As a federal contractor, this is where the money goes to the agencies. We've actually done a presentation for the council in the past called Follow the Money, which is about finding dollars and directives in federal appropriations bills. All of this info is public. You kind of just have to know where to find it. But a lot of the times there are directives put in by Congress that can give a sense of where agency priorities will be and where spending will be for the upcoming fiscal year. So we just want to tell you kind of what the process is and where it is and where it's moving in the future. So right now, the House has released their draft bills that can be found, and Eliza can put that in the chat, on appropriations.house.gov. The reason the House starts the appropriations process is because all fiscal measures have to start in the House. So every subcommittee has released their draft bill. There are 12, and now are in the process of the subcommittees marking up the bills, meaning adding or subtracting or changing them. And then the next step is the House Appropriations Committee to mark up those draft bills. And then the bill goes to the full House for a vote. So right now, I believe 4 out of 12 has passed the full committee. 8 out of 12 bills have passed their respective subcommittees. So I know that kind of the thought of the House leadership on the Appropriations Committee was to try and get all of the bills passed by the full House for a vote, probably before the August recess at the beginning of August. That's their goal. Not sure if that's going to happen, but that's kind of where the House process is right now.
Well, I was just going to say that I just give an example. Let's say you are you have contracts with the Department of Energy. If you go to the subcommittee or the committee draft that has the Department of Energy funding, it'll show you, it goes program by program. And if you know what the number was last year, you can tell whether or not the money's going to be about the same for the program, or if they increase it, you'll see, you'll be able to see that there's an increase, or if there are directives, as Elizabeth said, you can take a look. It may say the committee doesn't think spending should be done on X. Oh, wait, was that your program? I mean, there's so much information that you can find out about the contracts that you have by following the appropriations process. Big companies have whole teams that do this, that do nothing but this, follow the money, so that they are completely and utterly aware when the next, when the funding for next year comes up, what is in play and what isn't. So it's a really important intelligence, so to speak, for your business.
So Michelle, maybe then that's something we should do soon, now that the process is underway, is do, again, a refresh on our Follow the Money webinar for the council. Great. Then the other thing happening in tandem with the House is then the Senate also has its own version of appropriations bills. They are just usually slower to get going than the House because they start second. So in July, the Senate appropriators have said that they're going to, release and mark up draft bills. Again, the timeline's kind of TBD. But once the Senate does that, then the bills all need a Senate full vote, and then the House and Senate reconcile the differences to then get them signed into law. Now that is in a ideal, perfect world. That would all happen before the start of the next fiscal year. However, we have a few questions under the then what. One, an option that is the bane of government contractors' existence is something called a continuing resolution. That means that the Congress has not completed their work on funding the government for the next fiscal year. So they pass something called a continuing resolution that funds the government at the same levels as last year, but that also means no new starts for contracts or grants, and is a real problem. And that usually gets passed, the day before FY21 ends, and then usually lasts until right around the holidays, when everyone's scrambling to go home. Then usually that's when the appropriations bills get passed. At least that's been kind of the cycle for the past many years. And I'm going to let you talk about what a shutdown is, because I put it on the slide because we always get asked about the likelihood of a shutdown.
Right. So continuing resolution just continues funding until the Congress can come up with a comprehensive funding bill. And often, instead of passing individual bills, there's an omnibus bill, which just simply means omnibus spending bill, which simply means that it's all of the appropriations all in one place. Sometimes they have something called a mini bus, which means they do packets of 4 or 5 bills at one time. So maybe there's 2 or 3 funding bills with 4 or 5 agencies. So that's a strategy. If there cannot be any agreement, or one side is dug in, or the president is particularly unhappy with the funding packages, that's when you can end up with a shutdown. I don't think, Biden is not exactly the kind of president who would relish that kind of confrontation with the Congress. So I think it's maybe a little less likely that there will be, that there's a possibility of a shutdown this year. But the Congress is terribly divided. It's more divided. I said this 5 years ago, maybe, that it was more divided than I'd ever seen, but it's even more divided now. So it could be on Congress that they just simply cannot get it over the finish line. So there's a lot of ifs always at the end of the year, at the end of the process.
Exactly. So we will kind of keep you updated on where that process is and get that Follow the Money webinar scheduled shortly. Our next slide, we wanted to highlight a few more kind of important policy updates. But for the first bullet, I'm actually going to turn it over to Michelle. We worked on a letter to the SBA on the HUBZone program changes in guidance that I know many of you have contacted her about or contacted us about, that have been extremely problematic. So I thought that she could kind of shed some light on that kind of concerns that were raised and where we are there.
Hi, everybody. So yeah, John Williams, I was getting a lot of his clients that certainly were having issues because companies were getting notices at the recertification level that the language that was previously introduced in early 2020, it wasn't even like a variation of the language. It was like a complete 360-degree shift. So to go over some of the significant changes, obviously, I think that a lot of you guys were familiar with the fact that they shifted their review processes on qualified disaster areas, indicating that the 10-year rule would not apply to areas if they were redesignated and or a qualified disaster area. Another big component of it was stricter standards around principal office. This is one that is actually putting a lot of people in a compromising situation because as with COVID, people are reducing expenses. People are shifting to a more, virtual type component for office. And SBA, and I can tell you, I've helped some companies with their application. They are enforcing this. So SBA is saying that they define an office as a location, a dedicated office space with its own door that locks. So if you are in a situation where you are renting a desk or something to that regard, you are going to be in for a surprise at your recert. Now, we have asked, given the fact that these changes took place so significantly, so quickly, that SBA, if companies are undergoing the recertification and at that time realize that maybe their lease or something does not meet the minimum requirements, to please provide some flexibilities. We're asking SBA to come out with some specific language saying how these flexibilities will be viewed. But as of right now, if you run into a situation where you're undergoing your recert, we ask that you please contact us and we will help, coordinate with SBA to figure out if there can be some leeway at this time around. Another big component is SBA is not allowing individuals to classify legacy employees if those legacy employees are in a redesignated area. That language is not currently in there prior to, but that is a pretty significant change for a lot of people that were banking on legacy employees for the 35%. Another really big game changer, which is why we told SBA that it kind of seems that they should, give some flexibility, is because I'm not sure if you guys remember, under the NDAA, one of the main things that we were fighting for was the rural non-metropolitan county classification. Reason being is because in 2017, before the maps were frozen, there was hundreds of rural counties that were about to lose their HUBZone status. And it wasn't because the areas improved, it was just basically the way they did the algorithm. So when we had the non-metropolitan language removed from that, those counties became safe, which was great. But when the maps froze, what also came about with that is there was hundreds of more counties, hundreds of rural communities all across the United States that should have been added into the map. Now, because of the map freeze, SBA was saying, hey, wait, we can't add anything in. But for the last couple months, the team at Madison and I have been some of the other members have been working really closely with SBA and Congress saying, hey, these counties need to be added back in. We did a preliminary analysis and we were gauging that there was 313 redesignated counties currently right now that should be coming back in as not redesignated, and 430 counties that should be added in. So basically these counties would make the whole governor's petitioner rule like a moot point, because essentially it would be all the counties that would qualify for it anyways. So I talked to Lori yesterday and asked her where they were at with updating that information. And they said that, they're working on it. They're mapping specialists. Hopefully they'll have something here in the next week. But in the event that these counties are not added in the next 2 weeks, Lizzie and the team at Madison have already got a representative on the Hill on standby with a letter saying, all right, well, we're gonna force your hand. So here soon, there is going to be some significant changes to the mapping tool, really expanding it, and should help a lot of companies with their recruitment tactics with trying to find, qualified HUBZone residents. And, so hopefully that'll help you guys out with a lot of recruiting. Now, another really big thing that I really want to emphasize to everybody is the changes that they made to the application review process. This is actually extremely concerning because it was very clear that these changes are only being made in order to reduce the processing times. Now, for initial applications, SBA reduced the the processing times for companies. They're doing that same type of thing with recertifications. And if companies submit documents and you get an additional document request and you fail to respond, their approach is to decline you or decertify you. So SBA is really trying to, push, this is patterns that they've done in the past in order to manage the queue, because they're getting pressure from Congress saying, hey, you need to get these review times down. So, and to do it, what they're doing is giving a whole lot less time to companies to comply and putting the time frame so low that people are being forced to withdraw or something to that regard. Somebody texted in here, we were going to rely on legacy folks. What has changed there? So for legacy employees, if any of those employees are located in redesignated areas, they are not going to allow you to count them. However, I've had a couple companies that we're relying on like one or two, and SBA, I think, was giving them some flexibility this time around to give you a little bit of time to get yourself back into compliance without using them. But moving forward, it kind of seems like there's a pattern that SBA might be moving away from the concept of legacy employees. I did want to let you know that yesterday I actually got a call out of the blue from John Klein. It was yesterday or the day before, which was kind of out of character. So for those that are unfamiliar, John Klein is the head of policy at SBA. And he indicated that he is planning on doing some writing and getting some updates on some of the language for the HUBZone program and wanted some feedback. So I will be reaching out to everybody, asking if there is any other suggestions that you want to have in, because it was thought I heard him wrong, but to specifically ask us for our feedback about language that they're going to propose. So that's pretty great. I think that we covered everything. That was the major changes, right?
Yes.
PDAs. So if anybody has any other questions, SBA does have the FAQs posted, and I encourage everybody to pay very close attention to the changes around principal office, because I think it's going to ding a lot of people.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, please reach out about that and know that we are on top of it with the council, as Michelle said, as those changes continue, or we can get some changes made to that guidance. Just a few of, go ahead.
Mention, I also wanted to make sure everybody saw on that we're going to have a thing with GSA on the 15th. And
yeah, that's our next slide.
Okay, good.
Michelle.
All right. I just wanted to make sure you had that in there. Okay, I'll let you talk about
Go for it. No, it's fine. Eliza, can you go to the next slide? Go ahead, Michelle. Go ahead and talk about it.
So a couple, like when Polaris was all getting formed, GSA had reached out, and Madison and ourselves had a communication with them indicating what we wanted to see with Polaris and making sure that HUBZone had work share. So earlier this week, we had a meeting where actually one of our members, Mina, joined me with it and indicated that, so this is the recompete, the follow-on for Oasis. So they're preparing for that follow-on contract award, and they want to get industry feedback about what they should be doing. Now, one of the things that we were really pushing with Polaris was trying to get constant on-ramping. And based on our preliminary conversations, it looks like that is what they are planning on doing for Oasis. So that's going to be great, because one of the biggest concerns with some of these vehicles is like, once you're out, you're out. So if they are thinking about, more consistent on-ramping. So on the 15th, the representative that we spoke to from GSA is going to host a conversation, and we'll be working with WIP in order to collect industry feedback in order to help them with shaping this proposal. So I encourage all of you guys to get involved, because as we know, there is, a boatload of money that went through Oasis before. So I don't think anything that's going to change. If anything, we're probably going to see more money funneling through this new contract vehicle.
And Michelle, if you could put the link to register in the chat, and I know also on the council's social media, you can also find the link to register as well.
Our event calendar, so we'll post, it's all on our central event calendar on our website, but I'll put it in the chat as well.
Thank you. We're going to go back one slide, and I know we're running up against time, so just wanted to clip through a few other things going on. One is reintroduction of the Price Act. This is a bill that the council worked on that's trying to tackle part of the issue of, acquisition professionals not being comfortable using small business, not using hub zones. Basically, what this bill would do was require federal acquisition administrators and agencies to share best practices to modernize contracting procedures and how to better utilize small businesses. Basically, some agencies are really good at utilizing HUBZone companies, many are not. So kind of promote that cross-agency collaboration and cooperation to try and move the needle within the acquisition community. Another thing we wanted to bring to your attention was an executive order signed into law April 27th around increasing the minimum wage for federal contractors. This is an executive order that kind of builds on something that was done during the Obama administration. It requires federal contractors to pay workers at least $15 an hour starting January 30, 2022, or when exercising a new option year. So before you drop your computer, this is also expected to have the government eat the costs, not contractors. The intent of the executive order under the Obama administration was that, there would be an adjustment to the contract price based on the resultant increase in wages. So we expect in guidance that is going to come out that this is the same type of change as well here. So that's just one thing we want to update you on. Another thing is around an executive order of increasing contracting awards to small and disadvantaged businesses. This is the executive order around advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities. This is the one that has been talked about a lot in the small business contracting community because it stated a goal of increasing the share of contracts to small disadvantaged businesses by 50% by 2026. An additional $100 billion to SDBs over a 5-year period. Just to note that the administration cannot change SBA's contracting goals. This is something that has to be statutorily in the House and Senate Small Business Committees. And although there has kind of been an increase, proposed or kind of tossed around increase to something like 8A, I know that the SBA and the administration and Congress has all been looking at, well, how do you actually target specific businesses? It's not necessarily just blanketly raising a goal. So this is something that's been part of the conversation on the Hill right now.
Well, this is just simply the boss saying to the agencies, I want you to increase your awards by 50%. It's not a formal increase of any goal, as Lizzie said, the Congress has to do it. It's just simply, the president saying, this is what I want you to do. That holds a lot of weight, I've got to tell you. With every agency has been tasked with, so how are you going to get there? So they're all busy putting together reports and trying to figure out how they can best help contracting awards to small businesses, how that it can be fully utilized. Michelle and I were on a call with the State Department, for example. We're trying to figure this out by talking to their stakeholders. I mean, there's been a tremendous amount of activity based on the president's directive, regardless of whether it's statutory or not. So that's an ongoing issue that they're addressing.
And SBA is also working on it, and that's one of the discussion topics that SBA behind the scenes has been in communication with us, spitballing some ideas around. So while it's not statutory, I feel like that's what they're trying to lay the framework for, or figure out with regulatory how that can work in. So just letting you guys know.
Right. We've also had those same discussions, but in the context of what might go into that small business title that we talked about earlier in the infrastructure bill. They floated a bunch of ideas to the Congress, and so I think people are just kind of vetting them and trying to come up with good new solutions.
Exactly. And the last thing, just as employers, we want to make you aware that the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, did put out guidance saying that EEO laws do not prevent an employer from requiring all employees physically entering the workplace to be vaccinated. This is subject to a reasonable accommodation for religious belief, disability, or set observance. But just as you're thinking about re-entering the workplace, know that there is some EEOC guidance on this issue. And with that, go ahead.
Oh, I wanted to tell you everybody one thing, and I also wanted to ask Anne a question too. First thing is, I wanted to let you guys know, we've been working with the Maryland Minority Business Council because one of our members had reached out to us requesting interest in trying to get HUBZone recognized on the state level for public utility. And we are extremely close to making that happen. And this actually would be great because the type, like the infrastructure and how like spending patterns are for public utility is very similar to how the DBE program is. They tend to follow that model, but they're outside of that jurisdiction. So we've worked with the Black Caucus in the state level that has all been receptive. Like at this point, we've talked to multiple legislators, commissioners, and representatives from the public utility, the PC 52, all of which seem to be very receptive to this moving forward. I got the formal request yesterday inviting me to the hearing on September 7th. So I'll be multitasking down where our event is for the golf outing to try to, bring it home. So then that way, HUBZone gets recognized on that state level. with the understanding that a lot of these utility companies cross multiple states. So mail-in being the first, and let's hope that multiple other states will follow. So that'll be a big deal. But when you were making the comment about the SDB for 10%, now the FAR states that women are considered disadvantaged as well. So do you think that, because I was talking to one of the agencies the other day, and they were actually, no, it was John Klein. And he was like, well, women are technically, yeah, because I saw that reference point in the FAR. So do you think that that's something that they're thinking about, just bundling it from that component, like still having the set aside, but including that in the percentages?
Certainly Capitol Hill believes that it's women and minority businesses, right?
Okay.
And so anything that comes from them will consider SDB to be both.
Okay. I was just curious. Yeah.
I was, that's, by the way, not a dumb question, because I had the same question. It wasn't clear to me either, but we did get clarification from the folks on the Hill that in fact they intended to be both.
So, I mean, technically it wouldn't be any different, because if it's, they already double dip already. So if there's a 5% spending for women and a 5%, like, because this is a current percentage, do they count it like already when they have the minority, when you have the SDB self-cert, are they already counting women spending in that total right now?
No, they break it out separately.
Okay. So
Yeah.
wouldn't it, if they were going to say, hey, the increase, and with the understanding that women fall under SDB, technically wouldn't they already be meeting it, that 10%?
It's possible, a long time ago, SBA did have an SDB program.
Yeah.
Women were included in that program. That's before, we got it moved into a separate program. So they were included before.
So, I mean, technically they'd be like, all right, we're done. We're good. We met the 10%. Well, based on how they do spending now and how liberal they are, in case any of you guys were participating in a panel discussion with HHS yesterday, where it was Bruce, it got a little, I got a little animated in our discussion about the lack of set-asides. I got a lot of comments and feedback. I'm not sure how much I'll get invited back to speak, but but it was definitely, I think that we're starting to get through to people about this whole double and triple dipping thing is becoming a serious problem, because the number of set-asides and opportunities is just keeps reducing, and that doesn't fix anything. If we're trying to promote equity, we shouldn't be just focused on, increasing spending, but increasing opportunities.
Exactly.
Always advocating in the agencies. I love it, Michelle. Fantastic. Well, with that, thank you all so much for joining us. I threw the Council Strategic Summit registration link. Don't forget to register in the chat, September 8 and 9. And we will talk to you soon. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, ladies. Really good.